Bhattacharjee in conversation with Dr. Sandeep Shastri. I request you gentlemen to kindly come to the stage. Mr. Manash Bhattacharjee and Dr. Sandeep Shastri. We'd like to
Sure.
welcome you gentlemen with a round of applause.
Round of applause, please.
Mr. Manash Firaq Bhattacharjee is a writer and political science scholar from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is the author of Nehru and the Spirit of India. The town slowly empties, life and culture during lockdown, and looking for the nation towards another idea of India. His writings, apart from regular contributions to The Wire, have appeared in the New York Times, Al Jazeera, The Hindu, The Indian Express, among others. He has also taught lyric poetry and literary journalism at Ambedkar University, Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Sandeep Shastri is a political scientist who is the Vice Chancellor of Jagran Lake City University. He is the author of a book on Lal Bahadur Shastri and also specializes in the study and analysis of Indian politics with a special focus on elections. A consultant to the United Nations, World Bank, and the Forum of Federations, Dr. Shastri has delivered lectures in over 50 countries in all the 6 inhabited continents. Hearty welcome to you, sir. I now hand over the session to you. You may please proceed.
Check.
Good afternoon, friends. It's indeed a special privilege to be back at the Literary Fest. Uh, it's the third year I have been part of this very, very fascinating dialogue we have been holding. And this time around, it's a special honor to share the stage with Manash. He has this latest book of his, Nehru and the Spirit of India, which I think is meticulously researched, succinctly articulated, and very, very persuasively presented. And he looks at the spirit of India from the prism of Jawaharlal Nehru's writings and reflections. I'm sure those who have not seen the book would try and get a copy of it after this session. He has 4 excellently worked out thematic chapters. Now, based on previous experience, Manash and I have decided that we'll make this in the form of a conversation rather than long statements from either side. So, this is not a predetermined result, I promise you. I've just given a brief hint to Manash as to what I could raise with him. And given his knowing of this book from the front to the back and the back to the front, and I've made all these notes on your book, I'll raise a few questions and we will all listen to his response and then take it forward. And we will give an equal amount of time to our audience to raise questions. So, Manash, ready to go? Now, let me begin where you begin in this book. I'm taking a few lines from your first page, which immediately struck me when I read it. And I quote, "The ills of history evoke partisan sentiments. It's one thing to lose one's temper with history. It's another to believe in exaggeration of truths. It's another thing to believe in exaggeration as truth." Now, for me, this is the core of the book. And if I may add, this is the core of politics today, yesterday, and in the future. So let's start with your response to how did this very, very interesting set of lines become the start of your book?
Thank you, Sandeep. I must thank the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival for inviting me to speak here, and for Dr. Sandeep Shastri to have agreed to have this conversation with me. And I thank all of you for being here. Um, um, yes, so I think, because when I thought about the introduction, and in a way, actually, I wrote the introduction later, as it often happens. And but I knew like this was uh, how I had probably started thinking of the problem, and and it was inevitably perhaps both something very urgent, immediate, as well as something which relates to the past. So so as I start the book by mentioning my father, that how I grew up listening to a lot of um, angry things being said about Nehru by my father. And as a child, I could have been very taken by what my father was saying, because he is this patriarchal figure, and he used to talk with a lot of vehemence about things that he believed and did not believe. But somehow, I think, I don't know whether I can blame it on the social studies teacher at school, or maybe just something about Nehru that caught my attention, that I wasn't fully persuaded or taken by my father's very angry sort of views on Nehru. Though I could understand that, being a partition sufferer from East Bengal, and had a difficult time during that period, he would be having um, certain views which were backed by what he knew then, and what he had learned then. But I wasn't sure. So I think somewhere I delayed my final judgment on Nehru. And then in 1989, when the Bharat Ek Khoj was shown on Doordarshan, I was, I think, by then, I think my father had lost me on Nehru a lot. I'd come to really, be taken by, him, and his persona, and the way he was actually presenting the idea of Indian history. And later, of course, I take him up as my MPhil and PhD topic. And then what happens, if I leap into the present time, that there have been friends that I have known in the university, or otherwise, outside the university, who I thought um, they had they had uh, a Nehruvian sensibility, or at least shared a certain Nehruvian sensibility, but suddenly, as if they had started questioning themselves, or questioning what they believed in earlier, or perhaps what they believed in earlier wasn't quite true. So it was, a strange sort of of a disbelief in their own past, or perhaps a past that they had partly hidden from themselves. So it I don't know what sort of complicated depths it was coming from, but I could just see suddenly the world was changing. And as if those very, very motivated, crude, often vulgar sort of, reductive attacks on Nehru on social media and media was not just about, people who did not know about Nehru, never really read about him, and then voicing these opinions, but also people who had perhaps even read him was sort of behaving and talking in a certain manner. So all of that, again reminded me of my father. So it wasn't something new. So then I started thinking that, okay, there is this thing about history that certain things are expressed and certain things remain unexpressed, and they are the sort of the hidden prejudices that we harbor. We are often, not very confident of sharing them with others, but suddenly maybe a moment comes when we feel confident enough to do that. And then for me, the term ills of history, of course, somewhere means that we take history very seriously, but I don't think history takes us that seriously. And the ills of history particularly is for me that belief that the way we see history is the sort of correct or the right way of seeing history.
Thank you, Manash. I'm sure uh, people's curiosity on the theme has been aroused and people are thinking of possible questions they can ask. You used a word in your initial response, and the word was encounters, which I'm going to come back to. Those of us who were here yesterday evening and were part of the music extravaganza we had with Usha Uthap yesterday, uh, Usha very, very eloquently talked about diversity. And in your book, and I was reminded of that this morning when I was rereading your book, I was reminded of yesterday's session. You spoke about culture being an association across languages and locations. I repeat, culture reflecting association across languages and locations. And for me, yesterday evening's program was a clear example of that. And you talked about India is a nation, not in transition. India is a nation in translation, is the term you use in your book. Given this, now I come to my second point. Your chapter on culture and the urge toward synthesis, where you quote Jawaharlal Nehru and say he appeared to understand culture as a matter of certain experience, an experience which involves encounters. So Manash, tell us more about what you developed from this theme in terms of culture and this whole debate on synthesis.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean that's a interesting question, which can be just broadened infinitely. For Nehru, of course, the question of synthesis comes from how he himself perhaps felt so close to and so affected by some of the key figures of all religions, not only from India but also from abroad. And for him, it was impossible for him to take away any part of it from himself. He felt that all of these figures, and all the cultures that these figures represented were all part of his self, of his being. And that is why for him synthesis was almost like a natural phenomena in India. And even for us, and also because you mentioned music is of course one of the most sensuous, intimate, immediate sort of spontaneous sort of relationship that we make with culture. So whenever we are whenever we are told about other religions or other cultures and how to see them, probably not in a nice way. One of the things we also remember immediately of those cultures and those religions are the kind of the music that we have learned from them, and what kind of music was part of our growing up, and those languages have shaped whatever we understand as culture. Culture for me is more an experiential thing than a definitional thing. It is what is constantly taking us away from ourselves. For me, and I'm completely taken by Nehru's understanding on this, that culture is impossible to experience without the ability to lose oneself. It's only as much as you can lose yourself, lose your strict definition of culture, your strict idea of culture, only then perhaps you can begin to feel what culture really is. So cultural experiences are porous experiences. They go beyond these sort of religious, ethnic, and all, and these sort of barriers which are put up in our understanding. Whereas and it happens because of political reasons. Whereas culture itself, we have already given ourselves to other people, to others, to other cultures. So we cannot really claim to take one part of our language, one part of our tongue, one part of our music, one part of our words away from ourselves. That's actually, in a way, to really, in a way, to really harm ourselves, to really indulge in violence against ourselves, really. And when it comes to really culturally attack, ignore, or other people, we are actually also othering ourselves.
Let me come to a little more controversial point. You have a chapter where a major focus in that chapter is the faith versus reason debate. And you take the example of Chandrayaan 2, of how the scientists took a model of that and placed it before a deity in a temple and sought blessings and made sure that Rahu Kala was avoided and all that. And as part of that, you raise this question of how, and this is a very interesting line I'd like you to elaborate on. You say in modernity, there can be no miracles, either real or fake. In modernity, there can be no miracles devoid of politics. In modernity, there can be no miracles devoid of politics, you say. And you go on there to make the point that modernity offers us, you and me, offers us both easy and difficult choices which we are required to make. And reflecting on Nehru, you say, on this whole question of religion and science, there was a discomforting harmony in the way he looked at it. So maybe you could elaborate on that point.
Yes, I mean, I have been very clear on this issue for many years now, that I don't really come from a purely rationalist school of thought. And I don't really think that that science or scientificity necessarily has to explain everything that we do in our lives, we understand in our lives, and also of the world, and also of the universe itself. Because I think that there are a way of understanding and learning about the world, learning about our lives, which need not be, and which can take us pretty away from rationality. And I don't think that that is something to be embarrassed about or ashamed about, or that there is something really wrong in our thinking if we become less rational. And I know that there have been a lot on this debate where most modernists, whether from the left school or the liberal school, they mostly go by this whole very preachy, rationalist, scientific understanding of the world. My understanding is that, for instance, I mentioned this Chandrayaan example where I talk about how, and this happened even during the latest Chandrayaan episode as well, where where the scientists talk about these 15 minutes of terror. So there is this 15 minutes of terror where no scientist, no science can help you absolutely be very sure that something may not go wrong, right? So so, so when science cannot tell you or is of no help in those 15 minutes, what does a human being do? You can of course say that, well, we just keep a hold on our reason and wait. Well, you can do that, but people also succumb to a certain idea of faith, and faith need not be one specific thing or the other. Faith itself can appear in various forms, and I would not be very um, I would not be very uh, uncomfortable about somebody using that the strength of faith really to go across or to overcome that sort of period, and that is where anything which a person is closely related to, which can be religious, becomes part of your belief system. In fact, I have a very very famous statement of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I quite like quoting. Marquez had said in an interview that if you don't believe in God, at least be superstitious. And this is something very interesting, which I think the Latin Americans perhaps understand better than rationalist Indians or others. That what we call superstition and what is labeled as superstition under scientific rationalist understanding is that, yeah, that this is something really wrong. It has no basis and it should be discarded. Whereas Marquez is trying to say, and Marquez was, in his own definition, a disbelieving communist, right? So he said that superstitions are part of our culture, and we cannot completely, rid ourselves of them. So this whole binary, which Enlightenment thought brings into the world, of science versus religion, or science versus or rationality versus irrationality or superstition, that binary has been of course questioned in the West, and I think it's about time that we also learn to deal with it outside these very strict regimes of rationality. And Nehru, of course, was a huge convert, if I may say, to this whole scientific rationalist thought. And yet, he would happily contradict himself at certain moments where I think he would know, and he would say that, look, I mean, there are these constant pauses and questions in the discovery of India where he would say, oh, but I don't think this whole explanatory model, this whole scientific rationalist explanatory model of the world can really explain our lives. There has to be something which the ancients knew better than us, the way they understood life. So Nehru would often go back to the idea of beauty and wisdom, which he tried to locate in pre-modern cultures and understand. And he would say very frankly that, look, I think we have sorted a lot of things out, but perhaps there are still certain things that are unsorted for which we may take a leap of faith.
Thank you so much, Manash. I'll come to my last question and then open it up for the audience to raise questions to Manash. Manash, I go back to yesterday, where when being introduced, it was told to us Ushat Uttap was from Chennai, born in Mumbai, grew up in Kolkata, speaks and sang in so many different languages. And she herself raised this question of identity. She talked about herself from the south and very freely spoke in Tamil, and then realized that I need to translate what I say to English for the benefit of some sections of the audience. Which brings me to a chapter you talk about where you deal with the question of the citizen and his or her identity. And you make this point: identity creates paradoxes. And Nehru's own identity was no exception. identity creates paradoxes, and Nehru's own identity was no exception. Maybe you could elaborate for the benefit of this audience what you implied by that.
Okay. I think I get like two different things from your question. Let me see if I can somehow merge them together or leave them in their own sphere. Um, the first thought which came to me about your translation and how she was going through so many, translating herself through so many languages. Yes, I think like the way we spoke on your first question, and that how it is true that we have an absolute wonderful diversity of languages and cultures and experiences. I was traveling by train last night, and my co-passenger was an army man from Chennai, and we spoke for a bit, and then I was telling him about the Tamil songs that I really enjoy, mostly from A.R. Rahman, which we used to actually hear and sing at the, in the hostel at the university, and there were actually some songs that even he also hadn't heard of. So in a very quick time, we were talking about music, and we really, I think, forgot about where we were from, and actually talking about that music, which was part of both of our lives, and which means basically that our cultural experiences, our cultural identities cannot be territorialized. We are not territorial beings. There is, of course, a, a, a reality of territories, of many territories, territories of land, territories of the mind, territories of the heart, that we are constantly forced to grapple with. But actually, in reality, we really don't have those territories, or we can do away with those territories very very easily, and that is what comes up also in the citizenship question, because when I read the Constituent Assembly debates, I was quite amazed to see that what we were debating right now, when the whole the whole NRC and CAA thing came up, that these were exactly the issues which were debated in the Constituent Assembly in 1950. And the question was not the liberal conception of citizenship, that of belonging, national citizenship, and all of that. It was actually people who were raising the question about who the citizen is. So the citizen was being defined according to identity. That identity was linked to nationality. Who can be a citizen, who cannot be a citizen, what are the identitarian politics behind it. So all of that was very much debated in the most partisan manner by a lot of people, and which also happens today. So, and also coming from a second generation refugee family, I could also see that that people who were you know defined or described as refugees always had this anxiety of becoming a citizen. And my point was to actually not just make the liberal gesture of trying to be very large hearted and simply just say that, well, we must believe in a secular liberal idea of the citizen and welcome citizens from all different religions and identities into our within our nation. Uh, but I would like to also actually see it from the opposite direction, and want to see how the refugee actually looks at the citizen, and to question this very favored idea, this favored figure of the citizen, and to say that the refugee is a problem, because the problem of nations is the problem of the refugee. It is, and citizenship or the citizen does not fully solve that problem. There always will be somebody who is not a citizen desperately trying to be one.
Thank you so much, Manash. Let me now turn to our audience. I had promised to give at least 20 minutes to the audience. So from our audience, if there are friends who have questions, I'd request you to please introduce yourself and pose the question as crisply as possible so that Manash has time for the response. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, sir. I'm Ishita Nimje. I'm an artist and I'm also a research associate with Amrita Institute. And we are actually, my topic is on culture and heritage. So my question for you is that it was quite insightful to hear you today. And I would want to know that while writing this, is there something that you experienced as a challenge? Because I think you have like with your talk, I could see that there were quite complexities that you have tried to include the modernity and with faith and every discussion that we had. So I would want to know what were the challenges that you personally encountered while you were writing this book. And also I would want to know that is there something you would like to share with us which needs exploration beyond the book that you have written?
Okay. Um, uh, well, I think there are two sorts of challenges perhaps that any writer would face, particularly when you write political non-fiction or any sort of non-fiction which deals with history and politics and all of that. One challenge would be, of course, the body of literature that comes before you, people who have dealt with these issues before you, and how do you tackle those views? Where do you see yourself agreeing, disagreeing, and how do you navigate yourself critically through that literature? That's one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge would also probably be about, you know, how much grounded or how much sure you are of your own views that you are going to put out there, because that also needs an equal amount of, thinking and that then kind of transforms into this sort of a critical engagement with other ideas, right? So I think these two are probably the main sort of challenges that one faces. And often, this challenge is not just about ideas, but about language itself. How do you use language, particularly in a time that we live in, where everything has come down to very crude polemics, where people think that polemics is truth. You are free to say whatever you feel like about anybody. So there, to how to carefully use language also to show that you know that deep engagement needs a certain kind of. So that I think is uh, the challenges. And about what is not there in the book. Uh, I think everything is, I mean, whatever is not in the book is beyond the book, I mean, it is as simple as that. Yeah. I think, only after reading the book, you will yourself come to know where else this book could have gone and didn't go, right? I mean, yeah, so, it'll be difficult for me to think. I'm still constrained by the limitations of the book.
Namaskar, I'm Nandini and I also write historical biography. My question is, when you were talking about the ills of history, I was quite intrigued by how you were talking about people bringing up their prejudices, long suppressed prejudices. I have a mother-in-law who faced partition and she had some fairly traumatic experiences. And to me, it seems that it is not just prejudice, it's trauma. Suppressed trauma. Would you agree with that? That a lot of the way people are reacting to history is suppressed trauma as well, which has not been addressed at all.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And two things that immediately comes to my mind. One is, of course, absolutely right that that the the left liberal intelligentsia uh, must somewhere agree and or accept with some humility that they have not really addressed this question properly. They have allowed certain pathologies which come from history to remain. trauma is one of them. People have lived with trauma, and I don't think it has been really addressed. And the proof of it lies in our books, the books that have been not written for a long, long time. And so they have allowed these silences to remain for all sorts of perhaps rationalist reasons, to not really tackle the irrational, and which is where the whole problem lies. So I completely agree with you. And the problem of this, then, the other thing that comes into the picture is when you don't allow people who have experienced this trauma to be really able to speak, and if you cannot bring it out in a way that, let's say, that South Africa was able to do, do something, think on truth and reconciliation lines, not individualizing suffering, as somebody, a very good South African scholar had critiqued truth and reconciliation for, that to also look at group sentiments, not be really scared of what people are going to say. People are not going to say nice and easy and very sweet things. They are going to say very bitter things. We have to listen to those bitter experiences. I think those were really avoided in our very neat discourses of the past, and which is why I think a certain politics was allowed to sort of get into those zones and make a politics out of it. So there I think the problem really lies, that the avoidance of this problem really allowed it to gain this a different sort of picture. Yeah, that is true. Thank you.
Any more questions, please? You can raise your hand. Anyone at the back? No further questions? Okay, great.
Okay.
No worries.
Before we
Yes,
close
yes,
the
sir.
session, I started with a opening sentence of Manash's book. I'm going to go back to him with the last few sentences in his book, and I'm going to quote him here. He says, "The competition for power in democracies induces chronic instrumentality." And now I come to the critical lines. People lower their ethical standards and use any means to gain power. Manash, were you describing Nehru's times? Were you describing modern times? Were you describing some other times?
I think ethics is always bound to have quarrels with politics, because politics is ruled by the question of power, and ethics is fundamentally about how not just how not just to humanize power, but also to uh, uh, keep the question of other people, of people who are going to face your decisions, face your judgments, face what you do in power. That question is never, or almost never, asked by power, right? And I have no doubts that in Nehru's time it was probably better than it is, or it has been later.
Thank you so much.
So we have time.
No. It's 3:45, and I was wanting to make sure we close on time, but we still have 5 minutes more. If somebody has a pressing question to ask Manash based on especially the last point he said, please feel free to raise a question. Yes.
Please pass on the mic to the gentleman right there in the second row. Yes, sir.
I'm Azad Jain. Mm, My question is, do you actually see, because this trauma that we talk about, one generation, two generation, three generation, now we are inventing traumas. So, and we are inventing stories, and those stories have become real for a very large number of people, very young people, who have no alternative stories to look back to, unless they look for these books and histories which most of them will never have access to. So do you see a way out of this ecosystem to be created by whoever wants to challenge that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. It's a serious question, and it is a pressing question. So like we have had uh, this writer from America, and he's Jewish, and he spoke about uh, the Holocaust in industry. That after a certain point, there was a Holocaust industry which was just playing on the Holocaust, and was not really doing what the earlier Holocaust survivors, their literature was doing. They turned it into some kind of a very strengthening of identity and all of that, and we have seen how that precipitates into certain kind of Zionist tendencies and all of that. So similarly, perhaps here, that after a certain point, the real histories, if they sort of go into the background, there are other histories which are then taken up. In fact, I have been close to that sort of a history happening simultaneously while growing up as well. There were friends of my father's who would come home, and even though we were children, and we were very terrified by these stories of violence, they would actually forcefully tell us these stories to actually make us to come to communalize us, if I may say so. But and those stories have their own sort of deep impacts on people, and which is why I think when you see that in current times, when certain people have also given up or gone back on things that they believed in themselves while growing up, or kept certain things hidden. Now they have also fallen for those sort of stories. So we really have a deep problem in our hands, and I don't know the solution. The only solution for me is to have the true stories come more and more to really contradict these stories, and only stories can contradict stories. I think really, only our only rational our argumentation won't really work. I mean, that is my submission, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manash. Now I would hand over to the organizers, and
Yes.
we have ended on time.
Thank you so much, Liman. I'm really grateful for you for being punctual and for taking care of the time. And please give a big round of applause for the gentleman, Mr. Shastri ji and Bhattacharjee ji. Uh, of course, I was talking to my co-anchor Numra about this session, and she wonderfully mentioned that since Nehruji has been so embedded into the freedom struggle, that it is often said that to read Nehru is to read India, and wonderfully depicted through this discussion. Thank you so much for your book, and I would also be requesting our author to please spend some time at the author's signing desk, so that anyone who wants to have your book signed by the author himself, or maybe if you want to have a discussion with them, please head towards the author's signing desk. And now I would like to request Meenakshi Duaji, the founder member of Society for Culture and Environment, to please come forward and present a memento to both our guests as a token of love and respect on behalf of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival 2024. The memento that you see, it is the mascot of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival 2024, developed by the senior Gond artist Sri Ram Singh Urveti ji. Please, a round of applause for our author, Bhattacharjee, and Mr. Bhattacharjee, and for Shastri ji as well. This memento reflects a motif rooted in timeless stories. With vibrant strokes, Ram Singh ji brings life, sowing trees and mythical forms, echoing the melodies of Banadev, the revered musical instrument of Pardhan. Yes, there it is, the beautiful mascot of Bhopal Literature and Art Festival.